So, a recent scary, like spooky situation. We were filming in North Wales for a film which is due out in either next year or the year after, and it's called at the moment Evie, and it's about just a little girl who's quite troubled and a little bit spooky herself, and we were outside of a location, and I was cold and it was raining, and there was like a little stone collection, just like little pebbles just on the floor with some Sharpie pens, and it was like a community stone mess. You used to write messages on the stones, and if it was if it flooded or if the water came up, it'd take the stones away and they'd land on different shores. And I was like, oh, okay. And one of the stones in the center just had Evie written on it. And I was like, oh my God, that's the name of the film of the scary child. I'm standing here going, oh, it's freezing. And this stone, so when I picked it up and turned it over, it just said something along the line. I took a photo, it says Evie 2012. And that's when the film is meant to be set, in the future. And I took a picture and I was just like, oh my goodness, what the hell? Like, it's not even a Welsh name that I was aware of, or it's not even a common name. And it just had Evie 2012 on this stone. And it really freaked me out. Really freaked me out.
I have two ghosts in the house where I currently live. I believe that their names are Kitty and Lewis because my friend Max and I used one of my many Ouija boards to contact them, and that's what they said that their names were. And they're an elderly couple who died in the 70s, first Lewis, and then in the 80s, Kitty. So at first, I was really scared of Kitty and Lewis. Things would happen like I was having a dinner party and the teapot went off and I said, hey, whoever put on the tea, your kettle's ready. And then no one had put on tea. One time I came home from work and the mixer was running. I hadn't baked. And I mean, truth be told, I've never baked. I just bought it because of the Great British Baking Show. One time I was sitting in bed with my dog, Edie, and I heard very clearly from the hallway, Josh. So much so that Edie burst out of bed and went running into the hallway, even though I live alone. So at first I was really scared, but I've become really comfortable with them. And so now mostly they help me find lost things. Like one day my hands are dry from sanitizing them so much because of COVID-19. And one day I accidentally dropped my hand balm behind the bookshelf. And I thought, well, that's going to be a pain in the butt. I'll get that later. And I went outside to take out the trash or something. And when I came back in, the hand balm was sitting in front of the bookshelf on the floor. Or I need an attachment for my food processor. And I look through all the drawers and cupboards and I go to the bathroom and come back and it's sitting there on the counter where it had been empty. So I've become quite comfortable with Kitty and Lewis. They're like my ghost grandparents, and I'm never going to move because I love them so much.
So I live in the neighborhood that I live in. There's a bunch of trees and green space and parkways, which is in between the sidewalk and the street, where a lot of homeless people sometimes camp out and just sit there and hang out. But there's this one spot where I walk around in my neighborhood where there's always this guy, the same guy, and he's always sitting there drawing in a little flip notebook, and he looks like a prospector. We call him the prospector because he wears like an old prospector's hat. He has a full like long white beard. He's like 80 years old. He has suspenders. Like it looks like Central Casting prospector. And I walk by him every day. And I mean, with COVID, I walk around him. I like don't get too close with him. But finally, me and my friend were walking past him, and we worked up the courage to say hello to him. And we walked up and just like politely said hello. And he just like looked up from his drawing, which was like a woman, which could have been like some woman in her house, could have been bad intentions. But anyways, we said hello to him, and he just looked up at us and stared at us and didn't say anything. And he has these like piercing black eyes, like a shark, like a doll's eyes. And it was very scary. And I'm convinced that he's a time traveler from the past when in prospecting times. And I don't know that he can speak even. I think he's here for malevolent reasons.
Okay, so rewinding many years to when I was but a child, and I lived in a different part of Manchester. My friends and I, as kids, often did back in the 90s. We went for a bike ride, and it was a part of like a big open fieldy kind of grassy area that we would often go and play football in, cycle around. But you know, like a lot of places in England, especially, you've got playing fields and you've got football fields, and then they're often surrounded by wooded areas. And like, you know, you hear all sorts of like old wives' tales about what might be in the wooded areas. And we'd always been told that if you went and searched hard enough, there was this old house. But we'd never seen it. And one day it was like the peak of summer, you know, classic like Stranger Things, Stephen King territory, where it's the height of summer, and for some reason you and your friends decide you're going to go and do the spooky thing. So we did. We were like, let's go and search through the woods and see if we can find this house. And eventually, after a long time, we'd kind of gone off so many different paths and beaten trails, and we came across this like dead area of the wood. It was like all of a sudden the trees just stopped, and like it felt as though everything became this kind of grey and ashen landscape, as opposed to beautiful summer woods. And the sun had started to dip. And we came across the house, and I tell you what, like it lived up to every single story I'd ever heard about it. It looked like, at least in my memory now, it looked like the house behind the Bates Motel. You know, it had that kind of classic wooden cladding. The windows were spooky. It looked like, as a child, the house wanted to eat you. And that's what it felt like sitting there. And we were like, you know, what should we do? We're about 100 feet from it at this point. That's the closest any of us felt like we could get to it. What should we do? Each one turning to the other, waiting for somebody to be brave. And so we kind of cycled up closer and closer. And then we noticed that it was actually surrounded by this like 3-foot high brick wall and a little iron gate at the front. It clearly nobody lived there, or like nobody in their right mind would live there. It looked like it hadn't been occupied for decades, if not 100 years. And then as we got closer, we noticed that there was actually something in this kind of, what I imagine at one point was a beautiful garden that was at the front of this house. Because I think with a lot of these houses, they tend to have been like the house of the person that almost owned the woods or the fields, or, you know, that was their land at one point, and it would have been this beautiful old house that homed some sort of really wealthy family. And then what we spotted was that in this little front garden, which was no bigger than like 20-foot square, it was really small. There was 3 individual gravestones of varying sizes. So, you know, I'd say it felt like we went up there instantly, but I think this was over like 45 minutes because we were all absolutely shitting ourselves. We went over and like read them, and what we found was that who we presumed was like the matriarch of the house had died and been buried on the land. And then like her teenage daughter, I think it was like 1800s was what's on the gravestone. It was like 1860 something to 1889 for the mum. Obviously quite young, but people were having kids and dying a lot younger then. And then the daughter was like 13. And then there was this tiny grave that was like so horribly small. And the tombstone was like that of an infant. I think it was like 4 or 5 years old. And like, we're obviously freaked the fuck out, but we're off our bikes, they're lay down on the grass. And my mate like shoves my other friend in the back towards the house. I was like, go in. And I was so afraid I could have cried. But like, he does it because, you know, that's what like young boys are like. He starts to go into the house. And he like edges open the door, and, you know, it's like opening. You can't really see inside, but he goes in. And I turn to my other friend, and we don't even say anything. Like, the door, as we turn to each other, does that classic thing where it literally edges back and closes. And we did not know what to do. Do we go in after him? Do we just wait there? Do we hope that everything's fine? Do we leave? Literally had no idea. So we let a little bit of time pass, talking about whatever, talking about football or how do we survive this. And I'd say like 20 minutes or so had gone by and we didn't know what to do. And we're starting to get really freaked out because it's not like he's come to the window and we can see him or we could hear him walking about. Like he's just gone in there and 20 minutes later, nothing has happened. And then it's 30 minutes and then it's 40 minutes and we're just paralyzed by fear. So we do the only thing that makes sense to us and we leave because we're kids. So like we get on our bikes and we cycle the fastest we've ever bikes. And you won't know the geography of where we are, but we cycle so fast in the wrong direction that we come out on a main road. Like that's where the woods end. They end on a different road. And so then we have to like cycle the rest of the way home. And then we realize obviously like we've left his bike, we've left him, we don't know what to do. So we're like thinking in our heads, let's just go to his mum and tell her what's happened. So we cycle straight to his house and we all live on the same street. And so we cycle up and we knock on his house and we're waiting there, not knowing what we're going to say to his mum because we literally think we've let her son be like killed by some witch. We waited and then the door to his house opened and I swear I've never experienced a house door opening so slowly because I was so afraid of his mum. And then as it did open, we realized that the person who was standing there was actually our friend. We were confused, still a bit afraid, I guess relieved, didn't really trust if it was him or not. And the first thing out of my mouth was just like, what are you doing here? We left you in that house. I think he might have actually swore at me because he was furious that we would have just left him. He said what had happened was he went through and like the entirety of the house was just like completely dilapidated. Like there was the rotten remains of some old stairs, but the only thing that was really still there was a back door. So he just literally walked in the front door in a straight line and out the back door. And he said he was going to come back round, but what he heard was us just shitting ourselves and not knowing what to do. So he waited there and listened as we freaked out for like the next 20 minutes. And as soon as he heard us leave, he went and got his bike, cycled the normal way home, beat us by a while, and was just waiting to freak us out, basically. It was the most terrifying couple of hours of my life. I'm still convinced to this day that my friend was actually left in that house and the person wandering the earth is actually some sort of possessed spirit that escaped using his body. But I guess I'll never find out. So the funny thing is about this whole experience is when I moved out of the house I was living in then and on that street, my nephew and my sister moved in and he still lives there actually, my nephew. And he said that a few years ago, maybe more like 10 years ago, he and his friends tried to go and find that same house because I told him kind of like the A, B, and C of the story. And he said they searched for hours and that house was not there. And not like there was part of an old house that had been torn down, but just like there is no building whatsoever in those woods. There is no house.
So my real life spooky story, God, I must have been about 8 years old, and my family, we were down in Oxford in England, staying at my uncle's house, which is quite a big old house. And because they didn't have enough spare bedrooms, I had to stay on a little fold-out camping bed in the conservatory, which was downstairs. And it was a really stormy, dark night. There was thunder, lightning, rain hammering the conservatory, so it was just like really loud. And my uncle had left me a little torch to turn on if I needed to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, because the light switch was like all the way at the other end of the room. So there I was trying to get to sleep, scared out my wits because every sound was terrifying me. And I slowly started to realize there was what I thought was a figure watching me near the window of the conservatory. And this was inside the conservatory. And bearing in mind at this point in my childhood, I'd just watched Gremlins for the first time, and I probably shouldn't have watched Gremlins because they actually did terrify me. And the creature looked like one of the Gremlins with its big ears and it was like quite bony features. And I stared at it for a while. You know, when you stare at something in the dark and it starts to take on a new form, I swear it was like one of these gremlin type creatures. And I just stared and stared and stared in absolute terror. And slowly, I swear, it started to turn its head towards me. And I was like fumbling for this torch, and I could not turn it on no matter what. It was a weird torch you had to like twist. There wasn't a button. So I like panicked. I ran upstairs to my parents, fumbling around in the dark, was like, come downstairs, there's a monster. And they were like, oh my God, of course, he's being stupid. We turned all the lights on, and in the spot where you would assume, oh, it was just a plant, there was absolutely nothing at all. So either my imagination as a child with the perfect storm of a literal storm and me having watched Gremlins the night before had created this creature, or there was a creature there that had scuttled away when I went to go get my parents. But I still remember that quite vividly to this day. And it's actually the only kind of scary ghost monster experience I've ever had, but it still stands out.
If I can